What happens when two brilliant minds turn their talents against the system? One hacking Wall Street from behind a corporate mask, the other ruling the dark web like a digital kingpin. These aren't movie villains. They're real men, real crimes, real consequences. And yet, their stories reveal something far deeper about power, anonymity, and the modern face of crime. Stay with me until the end of this video. What you're about to hear may change the way you see the digital world. Welcome to Red Dossier.
Before we move on to the next part, please give me a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for listening.
In the ever-evolving war between law enforcement and cybercrime, two Russian names rose to global infamy in the 2000s and early 2020s. Vladislav Klyushin and Alexey Burkov. Though born in the same country and caught in the same global net of digital crime, their paths diverged in motive, method, and magnitude. One operated under the guise of a respected tech entrepreneur. The other thrived in the dark underworld of stolen data and global fraud. Both would eventually face American justice, but for crimes as different in scope as they were in intent. Vladislav Klyushin, born in Russia and educated in IT and finance, presented himself as a successful businessman. He was the founder of M13, a cybersecurity and media monitoring company contracted by Russian government agencies. Beneath that respectable exterior, however, U.S. prosecutors revealed a calculated insider trading scheme. Klyushin and his associates hacked into the servers of American filing agents, companies responsible for submitting corporate earnings reports, and accessed confidential data before it was made public. Armed with this knowledge, they made precision trades on the U.S. stock market, profiting over $90 million. The operation ran from 2018 to 2020, affecting dozens of companies across the NASDAQ and NYSE. Alexey Burkov, by contrast, never wore a suit or pretended to play by legal rules. He emerged from post-Soviet chaos of the early 2000s with advanced programming skills and a hunger for influence in the digital underground. He created and operated Card Planet, a notorious darknet marketplace that trafficked in stolen credit card data from more than 150,000 victims, mostly in the US and Europe. According to court records and FBI reports, the site generated at least $20 million in fraudulent transactions, many involving US financial institutions. Burkov also ran a private invitation-only cybercriminal forum, vetting members by their digital reputation and connections, building a closed circle of elite black hat hackers and data brokers. While Klyushin's crimes straddled the boundary between finance and espionage, Burkov's were rooted in sheer criminal entrepreneurship. Cybercrime analysts view the former as potentially tied to geopolitical interests, given his company's contracts with Kremlin-linked entities. The latter, however, was a digital mercenary, loyal only to profit and reputation in the darknet economy. Their public reputations and criminal personas were as different as their methods. Klyushin was quiet, meticulous, and largely unknown outside security and legal circles until his arrest in Switzerland in 2021. Burkov, on the other hand, had long been a name of concern in cybersecurity briefings. American authorities had been tracking him for years before his 2015 arrest during a layover in Israel, an operation that triggered a lengthy extradition battle between Russia, the US, and Israeli courts. Understanding who they were before their crimes provides insight into how and why they chose their paths. Klyushin was shaped by state institutions, fluent in the language of business and bureaucracy, and possibly incentivized by political objectives. Burkov was a product of decentralization, operating outside the system, thriving in an ecosystem of anonymity and digital ruthlessness. Personality traits reflected these environments. Klyushin demonstrated patience, operational discipline, and a deep understanding of financial markets. His crimes were surgical. Burkov was bolder, more vocal in hacker forums, and built networks quickly and widely. That same confidence would contribute to his downfall. Yet despite their differences, both men exploited the gaps between cybersecurity and financial regulation. They navigated the shadows of a globalized digital economy, leveraging knowledge, technology, and the blind spots of international cooperation. They were not anomalies, but reflections of a broader, more sophisticated landscape of modern crime, one that no longer requires physical presence, weapons, or violence to cause real-world damage. In the next part, we move beyond introductions, into the heart of their criminal operations. How exactly did Klyushin's group execute trades with pinpoint timing? What infrastructure did Burkov build to keep Card Planet secure and thriving for years? And what ultimately made these men so careful, so elusive, vulnerable enough to be caught? What separates a cybercriminal from a cyber strategist is not just the code they write, but the structure behind their actions, the ecosystem they build, the rules they impose, and the purpose they pursue. For Vladislav Klyushin and Alexey Burkov, their crimes were not isolated bursts of greed, but long-running operations. Each man crafted a system that took years to perfect, and each believed for a time that the sophistication of their methods would make them untouchable. Klyushin's scheme relied on access, timing, and discretion. His group targeted specific filing agents in the United States, companies tasked with uploading earnings reports to the Securities and Exchange Commission's EDGAR system. By exploiting vulnerabilities in their email servers, the group downloaded unreleased quarterly financial statements from hundreds of public companies, including Tesla, Roku, Snap, and Capstead Mortgage. Once in possession of the data, they executed carefully timed stock and option trades, often just hours before the public release of the reports. The profits were staggering. In one instance, the group made over $4 million in profit from trades related to Capstead Mortgage alone. The sophistication of the scheme lay in its precision. Only a handful of traders were involved, the volume of trades was kept moderate, and the timing was fine-tuned to avoid regulatory alerts, at least initially. Burkov, on the other hand, thrived on scale. Card Planet was designed as a sprawling online bazaar where buyers could sort stolen credit cards by bank, country, type, and price. A built-in automated verification system allowed customers to test the validity of stolen cards before completing a purchase. He didn't act alone, but his leadership and digital security protocols kept the operation running for years. Beyond Card Planet, he also managed a private forum known as Direct Connection, accessible only by invitation and reserved for the most trusted cybercriminals. This inner circle exchanged stolen data, hacking tools, exploits, and money laundering techniques. Burkov acted as both gatekeeper and kingpin, a role that required technical skill, a strong reputation, and the ability to enforce digital discipline across an anonymous, fragmented network. Psychologically, both men displayed high levels of cognitive control and strategic patience, but their motivations diverged. Burkov's driving force was money and notoriety. In chats later recovered by law enforcement, he bragged about the efficiency of his systems and the revenue they generated. His language often reflected pride and technical superiority. Klyushin, by contrast, never spoke openly about his crimes. According to US prosecutors, his actions were not only driven by profit, but possibly linked to larger goals, aligned with Russian state interests. The fact that his company, M13, had contracts with top government offices in Moscow only deepened speculation about whether his operation was just a financial ploy or part of a larger geopolitical strategy. Whether or not he was acting on behalf of the state remains unresolved. But the proximity to power was real. Despite the sophistication of their methods, both men made errors that would ultimately lead to their arrests. Klyushin's downfall came when he traveled to Switzerland for a skiing trip in March 2021. There he was flagged by Interpol and arrested based on a sealed US indictment. Though Russia lobbied aggressively to block his extradition, Swiss courts sided with the American request, citing treaty obligations and the strength of the evidence. His mistake, in the end, was assuming his cover as a legitimate businessman, and the complexity of his network would shield him from international enforcement. Burkov's arrest came years earlier, in 2015, during a layover in Tel Aviv. He believed that by avoiding travel to countries with strong ties to the US, he could remain untouchable. What he didn't anticipate was the extensive diplomatic and legal effort the United States was willing to pursue to extradite him. Russia, for its part, offered a counter-deal: the release of an Israeli-American woman imprisoned in Moscow in exchange for Burkov's freedom. Israel refused. After years of legal proceedings, he was eventually extradited to the US in 2019, where he pleaded guilty to multiple counts, including access device fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Their arrests marked the collapse of two vastly different criminal structures. One, built on anonymity and scale; the other, on insider access and surgical precision. What they shared, however, was the illusion of invulnerability, a belief that intellect, caution, and digital skill could outmaneuver the machinery of law. But no system is perfect. Every network has weak points. Every plan eventually leaves a trail. The final chapter of their stories lies not just in courtrooms or prison cells, but in the consequences of their actions. Those consequences extend beyond balance sheets or headlines. They reach into how we understand power in the digital age, and the thin line between genius and criminality when technology becomes both tool and weapon. In the end, every system collapses under its weakest point. For Vladislav Klyushin, it was overconfidence, the assumption that his operations were invisible behind corporate legitimacy, and that no authority would dare cross political lines to reach him. For Alexey Burkov, it was arrogance, the belief that mastery of digital concealment meant freedom from physical consequence. Both men, once operating in parallel digital realms, eventually found themselves inside American courtrooms, subject to the slow, deliberate machinery of international justice. Klyushin was sentenced in February 2023 to 9 years in federal prison. During the trial, prosecutors emphasized not only the financial scale of his insider trading, estimated at over $90 million, but the threat it posed to market integrity. The trades executed by his group were too perfect, too timely, too consistent to be dismissed as luck or even genius. The US government stopped short of formally accusing him of working for Russian intelligence, but the court record made frequent note of his company's high-level Russian government contracts. Klyushin, for his part, maintained his innocence and refused to cooperate, portraying himself as a legitimate businessman unfairly targeted in a geopolitical conflict. Burkov's case concluded differently. After his extradition, he accepted a plea deal and admitted to managing a massive operation that enabled over $20 million in fraud. His defense did not argue innocence, but rather aimed to reduce his sentence by emphasizing his cooperation. Ultimately, he received a 9-year sentence as well. Yet the courtroom tone was markedly different. There was no political shadow, no implication of espionage, only the weight of financial crime on an industrial scale. His operation was global, but its goal was singular: profit. Their legacies, though both rooted in cybercrime, drift in separate directions. Klyushin's case intensified concerns among Western agencies about the overlap between state-sponsored activity and financially motivated crime. It became a reference point in discussions about hybrid threats, actors who blur the lines between government and criminal enterprises. His downfall served as a warning that financial manipulation via cyber intrusion is no longer just the domain of Wall Street fraudsters, but potentially of foreign influence operations operating under commercial cover. Burkov's name, meanwhile, became symbolic in the cybersecurity community of just how professionalized dark web crime had become. Card Planet wasn't just a marketplace, it was a model of criminal efficiency. The site offered user accounts, customer support, reputation scores, and payment automation. His conviction led to increased pressure on darknet platforms and demonstrated the international reach of US financial cybercrime enforcement. For law enforcement agencies, he became a case study in what happens when high-level cybercriminals assume they're beyond the reach of law. But perhaps the most powerful comparison between these two men lies in the nature of their failure. Both believed in systems. Klyushin trusted the protective shell of corporate identity and government proximity. Burkov trusted anonymity, encryption, and the distributed nature of darknet commerce. Both were brilliant in their respective domains. Both built models that worked until they didn't. So, who was more dangerous? Klyushin operated with more discretion, fewer transactions, but far greater strategic reach. His attacks didn't just steal, they exploited the timing of economic information to manipulate one of the world's most scrutinized financial systems. That kind of damage is harder to see, but its implications ripple far wider. A single manipulated stock price can erode trust across global markets. Burkov's damage was more visible: stolen funds, ruined credit, and tens of thousands of affected individuals. He eroded trust in everyday systems, payment processors, online merchants, banks. In terms of sheer technical depth, Burkov may have been the more sophisticated hacker. In terms of geopolitical consequence, Klyushin carried more weight. One worked in the shadows of the state, the other ruled the shadows themselves. Their cases sit alongside modern digital crime legends, not far from the likes of Evgeny Bogachev, the mastermind behind the Zeus malware, or even in structural ambition beneath figures like Pablo Escobar or Felix Gallardo, who also built empires, only theirs, moved drugs instead of data. Yet the danger is not in the name, or even the act, but in the systems they built, and what those systems allowed others to imagine as possible. For every Klyushin or Burkov, there are dozens watching, learning, adapting. The story doesn't end with a sentence. It begins again with the next line of code, the next market vulnerability, the next belief that this time the system will hold. Which leaves us with a final question, not about guilt, but about structure. If both men were brilliant, strategic, and relentless, what does it say about the world they operated in? And more importantly, how many others are already building the next system, convinced they will be the ones who never get caught? Two men, two systems, two different paths to the same destination, a prison cell. But their impact lingers in policy, in cybersecurity, and in the dark corners of the internet, still watching, still learning. Now, it's your turn to weigh in. Who do you think was more dangerous? Vladislav Klyushin, with state-backed subtlety and financial precision, or Alexey Burkov, the ruthless architect of global fraud? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let the debate begin. If you found this story compelling, give it a like, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next deep dive into the world of digital crime. Thanks for watching. This was Red Dossier.